is great. In that case, I'd like to welcome everybody to the private sector panel. We are all very thrilled to be able to participate in this BPIA first time ever virtual event. And I will start with introducing myself. I'm Daphne Michelle Titus. I'm the moderator. I am the principal in Signet Strategies. That's an international consulting firm, a family-run firm. I'm also a senior alumna of the Department of State, and I've also had the pleasure of working in the Department of Defense and USAID. We are very fortunate to be distinguished panelists, and I'm going to introduce them right now, but then I will go back to each one and tell you about them in a little more detail. Our panelists for this evening are Ambassador C. Stephen McGann, Ambassador Robert C. Perry, and Kendal R. Tyre, Esquire. We're going to start with Ambassador McGann. Ambassador McGann is the founder of the Stevenson Group, which is an international consultant and global security strategy firm. He specializes in providing strategic content to companies and organizations seeking to expand their operations into the United States, Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin American markets. He has cultivated a team to help clients identify opportunities in the defense security sector and creating specialized advisory services tailored to meet their needs. Ambassador McGann is formerly a career senior foreign service officer, and he's had several influential positions, most notably as the U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Fiji, Nauru, Kiribati, and the Kingdom of Tonga and Tuvalu. And he was previously the deputy commander and international affairs advisor of the Dwight D. Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy at the University in Washington, D.C. With that, I give you Ambassador McGann to tell you what he would like you to know.
Well, Daphne, thank you for that introduction. I think I'll start off with my biography in a little bit different way, particularly so not to bore the audience. But although I'm now the founder of my own consulting firm, I have to admit that it was the most recent private sector business that I had run since I was 11 years old and had a paper route in Los Angeles. I spent most of my, almost all of my career in the Department of State, and foreign service officers actually don't normally become consultants. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I ended up in the State Department was that after graduation, I was approached by the Bank of America for their management training program. I then realized what they had in mind for me was that one day I could be a district branch manager as opposed to offering me senior vice president in the International Affairs Division of Bank of America and living well in San Francisco. So it was clear that my private sector choices were limited at that time, so I chose the Foreign Service. And even in the Foreign Service, I would have to say that I did not think that what I did necessarily prepared me for what I do today. Consulting obviously requires knowledge and experience, and to a certain extent longevity, but most importantly, what led me to my decision to open a firm was not the Department of State, but it was the 5 years that I spent at National Defense University, ending as the Deputy Commandant for National Security and Resource Strategy at the Eisenhower School. But that gave me a different perspective on the world of contracting, the importance of working with the Department of Defense, given the fact that on average it lets $500 million a day in contracts. And I thought that after graduation from the Foreign Service, I would take the experience that I had at National Defense University, match with my Foreign Service career, to begin to start a business that I thought that would be competitive at the strategic level. As you can well imagine, there are very few minority-owned consulting firms that want to act at that level, but I was very fortunate to bring together a team to help me out. But in that regard, I just want to emphasize, and we'll get into this a little bit later, that it was a culmination of close to 40 years of work that led me to this point. Not that I graduated from college and immediately walked into a consulting job. So I think that when you're thinking about the private sector, you should keep in mind that yes, today there are opportunities in multinational corporations, non-governmental organizations, international organizations, what have you, that were not available to me. And so I think as you decide to move into the private sector, you have to take into account how business works, how you're working in a small pod, so to speak. Is not necessarily that you're going to be in a large corporation, all right? But most importantly, your opportunities to engage in international relations and foreign affairs are no longer limited to the government, but there are credible opportunities in the private sector for you. And with that, I'll stop.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ambassador McGann. Now we'll turn to Ambassador Perry. Ambassador Perry had a very distinguished 34-year diplomatic career with the Department of State. Some of his most notable positions at the Department of State were as ambassador to the Central African Republic, Deputy Chief of Mission in Mauritius, and Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs. Since transitioning from the department, Ambassador Perry served with great distinction as the Vice President of the Corporate Council on Africa, and he is currently the Director of the Africa team at the Stevenson Group. In addition to being a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Association of Black American Ambassadors, he has also served on the U.S. board of SAWIP, which is a leadership development program for South African university students. Ambassador Perry.
Daphne, thank you very much. I believe that international affairs offer great opportunities for BPIA members to use their knowledge and grow and increase that knowledge for their own benefit as well as for the organizations for which they work. Success on this journey is enhanced by self-awareness of your assets and culture and how they fit into the culture of the organization that you're working with. The appropriate mix of technical and language skills and an openness to understanding the culture of the internal and external stakeholders of your organization are keys to success. On a more personal note about my foreign service background, my first assignment was to what they call the courts program to South Vietnam during the war. And to get there, I traveled across the Pacific, went through Japan as well as Taiwan before I got to Vietnam. On my return, I decided to see the other half of the world. So I went to New Delhi and what was then called Bombay in India to see that great culture, and then it crossed over to Nairobi, to Dakar, to Monrovia, and Lagos. This was all in 1970. At that time, dogs could sleep in the street in Dakar without getting run over. Now, you look both ways and move quickly if you want to get across the street in Dakar, Senegal. Times have changed. Industrialization, urbanization is everywhere. To pick up on the now comments that Ambassador Naj made a few minutes ago about the growth of Africa, young population, and its dynamic, something we shall take into consideration. Now, another note about U.S. government. I think USG agencies offer great opportunities to learn how USG agencies work together to achieve defined goals and missions. One of my most interesting and challenging assignments was as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in La Paz, Bolivia in the late 1990s. The mission at that time was the largest U.S. mission in South America. Its goal was to reduce the production and export of cocaine from Bolivia to the U.S. market. This required productive collaboration between the staff from the State Department, USAID, Department of Commerce, DOD, DEA, and the intelligence agencies. Like I said, at that time, this was the largest embassy we had in South America. My job was to get them all on the same page in carrying out their respective organizational tasks while we maintained the partnership with the Bolivian government to achieve a common goal. Notwithstanding USAID's alternative development program to assist the coca farmers with legitimate crops, we encountered Bolivian interests that did not appreciate the U.S. government setting Bolivian policy. That led to the eventual election of Titus, the leader of the Coca Farmers Union, to the national legislature and eventually to become president of Bolivia for 3 terms, which just ended in 2019 when he was run out of office. That experience gave me an appreciation for the role of civil society that they can play in shaping national policy, notwithstanding the policies of elected leaders or international partnerships. That background helped enable me to play a more effective role at the Corporate Council on Africa in building relationships between business and government leaders so that in shaping agreements, they made them inclusive enough to take into consideration the interests of all stakeholders, internal and external, to the particular deal on the table. You also learn that you can accept, notwithstanding your best efforts. Sometimes deals fall apart because of irreconcilable differences among stakeholders. Now, should you want to pursue a business career rather than a government career, you have a choice between the multinational corporations with well-structured organizations or SMEs that are more entrepreneurial and less structured. Each has its pros and cons. If you're doing business, particularly as an SME, it is generally helpful to have a local partner for doing business in that country who can guide you through the hoops and understanding the business culture to get deals done. However, you're still expected to follow and respect the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. In general, doing business in developing markets has higher risk and higher returns than working in the U.S. market. Right now, we're going through a lot of changes with COVID-19. It changes the dynamic for interpersonal relationships, building those relationships in order to do business. It requires flexibility in terms of how you build relationships when you don't get to sit down across the table and break bread with someone. This is something we're going through, we're learning from it, and we will come out ahead. Thanks. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Perry. Now we will turn to Kendal Tyre. He is an attorney and he is a partner in Nixon Peabody, one of the most renowned firms that deal with business in Washington, D.C. Not only does he work on mergers and acquisitions and other corporate activities, he literally wrote the book on franchising in general and in Africa and Asia in particular. We are very pleased to have him join us this evening. And with that, I will let him tell you what he wants you to know.
Thank you, Daphne. Really appreciate it, and pleasure to be here. I was thinking about how to convey the information about my career path, so I'm just going to tell the story about all the bumps and different paths that I had to choose to arrive at where I am. And where I am, as Daphne said, I'm a partner at Nixon Peabody. I've been working at the firm for the last 27 years. Nixon Peabody at this point is a law firm with about 16 to 17 offices, most of which in the United States, about 4 in Asia, China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. It's one of the top 100 firms in the US. So my path, international as it is, really began at an early age where I spoke Spanish as a second language. I learned it in school. My family's not Latino, but from the age of 7th grade school, I took Spanish every academic day since the age of 12. In college, I lived and studied abroad in Spain, and that really solidified my interest in travel and international affairs. And I knew that I wanted to go to law school and somehow cross paths with an international background to enable me to use my Spanish. And so I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that. There weren't really any role models out there at the time. And so I tried a number of things to really sort of boost my international credentials. One of the first things I did, I wrote to every lawyer in Latin America that was either educated in the United States or had some tie to the United States, or any American that happened to be working at a law firm in Latin America. I ended up getting a job as a summer clerk in Mexico City. It's called a pasante, and very similar to law clerks that they have here, but I was on the U.S. team working on U.S.-Mexican transactions. It was about the time of NAFTA being passed. It was really exciting, and it was checking my boxes with respect to being able to use my law degree, or I was about to obtain my law degree, and working in an international setting and using my Spanish. Later on, a year or so later, I found myself in a large firm, and you had to choose, basically, were you going to do transactional work, or were you going to do litigation of some sort, dispute resolution? In my mind at the time, the only way that I was going to get back abroad, which is one of the goals that I had, and to use my international background, was to do transactional work, putting together deals, doing deals. At the time, I didn't really realize that there's a whole grouping of attorneys, a whole practice that focuses on international arbitration. So that's another sort of branch that people should explore if they're interested in going down that particular path. After years of working on a variety of international transactions, raising my hand for anything that Mexico related to it. I eventually made my way to network with lawyers, other Black lawyers at the National Bar Association. And on a couple of trips, actually, I was the chief of staff to the president, Clyde Bailey, and we went to Africa and met a number of individuals there. And it was about that time when people, lawyers at that age, really considering how we're going to make it over the hump, how we're going to make partner. And the real issue that I found as a Black lawyer was, how was I going to get sufficient business in order to make that a realistic goal of mine? And I realized at the time there really wasn't a network and that would enable me to generate the type of business that I wanted and needed. So, you know, what I've always done in the past is if something doesn't exist, I just create it myself. So I created this organization called Lex Noir. It's an international network of lawyers that connects the African diaspora. And it was basically Black lawyers in major firms across the world. And we would put on programs, we'd refer business to one another. It was my ticket to partnership, because I knew that it was going to be a challenge for me with the networks that existed and the practical realities of working in a large firm, which is a discussion for another panel. And so that proved to be pretty successful. And I then, at that point, was doing a lot of franchise work. And I realized that there was some opportunity to do international franchise work. Think fast food or automotive, childcare, hotels from the US expanding overseas and entering into franchise relationships with local partners or local groups of people. And so what I realized was there was a deficit on people who were focusing on Africa. So I used the network that I created and wrote the first book on franchising in Africa. And from there, a variety of work came out of it. I was able to distinguish myself not only in my firm, but also in the industry. And it led to a number of opportunities. Most recently related to that was an appointment to the Trade Advisory Committee on Africa, a U.S. Federal Advisory Committee. And it has worked out. So instead of boring you more with any particular aspects, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the field of law, more particularly large firm practice. Tremendous opportunities there, and I'm happy to share.
Thank you so much. Well, before we throw open the floor to questions, I like to use the moderator's prerogative and ask each of the panelists to tell me what is your biggest challenge right now in your business. And I will start with Ambassador Perry.
Well, we are a relatively new consulting firm, and the big challenge is getting paying clients. And maybe the emphasis is on paying, because I found my advice, drawing upon my experience over years, to be of interest to quite a number of people, but getting them to show some appreciation for my time and energy is another issue. Yeah.
Thank you. Kendal?
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think building more business is always a challenge. Maintaining the business that you have. I think though also there's the aspect of leveraging diversity and inclusion to increase that business, or to open up opportunities that may not exist for other people. I think also leveraging that on a global basis is even that much more important and relevant to the opportunities that exist for most people that are listening to this and most people that are on this panel. And I think it's something that has been done in the past, and I think we just have to get better at it and use the available tools and networking opportunities that we have. For instance, going online. This conference in and of itself is an opportunity to expand networks and to expand relationships. And we have to learn how to leverage that to get out and to network with people who have common issues and concerns. And I think getting out there and getting some name recognition and finding those clients who can actually pay is all part of the process. And in part of the issue also is there's only 24 hours in a day. And where do you put that effort and energy, and where does it pay off? It took me, each book that I write, and at this point, I've written about 4 or 5. It's about a 2-year process. The last book that I wrote was 2016. It was International Franchising 2016, Legal and Business Considerations. It was 600 pages, a project of about 60 attorneys around the world covering 42 countries. That was a significant effort to pull that together, but it all went back to the basic issue of I can use this to leverage, to get in front of people and to obtain clients that pay.
Thank you so much. Ambassador McGann?
Well, coming on the heels of Kendal and Bob, I think I figured out a way to say the same thing differently, because I endorse everything that they've said. So I would look at the greatest challenges in 3 areas, and they're all linked: capital, credibility, and sustainability. Capital, simply because obviously you need money, because you have to think of yourself as a startup. So you have to be able to fund your company as you move forward. I was fortunate enough in which I was able early on to partner with a Washington law firm that provided office space and administrative support in the early days as I started to build a company. Credibility is linked to capital, simply because you need all of the tools, from websites to email addresses, because you cannot assume that you can be competitive trying to market yourself with a Yahoo or AOL account. Secondly, when it comes to credibility, it's still important to have a good location. We were fortunate enough in those early days to be in the offices of the law office. And if you go to our website, you'll be able to see their name, but they're in their law offices until we were able to get sufficient enough contracts to be able to cover our own administrative costs. And we were able to move to our own location still in central DC. But both of those points, again, are linked to credibility. Again, being the consulting firm that works out of your basement is likely to be a consulting firm that's not successful. And success is linked to the final point, which is sustainability. As a consultant, there are 2 levels of contracts. There are those short-term contracts that we call low-hanging fruit that may only bring in about $5,000 to $15,000. And so by the time you pay your staff, your consultants, and your administrative costs, I can assure you that the owner of the consulting firm don't have much of a profit margin. But that low-hanging fruit is necessary for your sustainability, because most of the projects that we engage in take what upwards to come to fruition. And I'm emphasizing that are linked to the defense and security sector, as well as also in the private sector to a certain extent. But again, sustainability, you have to be able to maintain the ability to work sometimes and often using sweat equity in order to bring in that consulting contract that will make you competitive at the level in which we're trying to operate, which, as I mentioned earlier, was at a strategic level. So as you're thinking about embarking upon your own careers, and one day you start your own firm, remember you'll need capital, credibility, and sustainability. But as you're going through your career, and this is something that I'm going to borrow from Ambassador Perry, consultants don't eat what they hunt, they eat what they kill. So you have to be able to be an aggressive marketer. You have to be knowledgeable about your field and also understand that you could work 6 months trying to land a client. So you have to be able to have all three of those simultaneously: capital, credibility, and sustainability, in order to succeed in the consulting world.
Thank you so much, Ambassador McGann. With that, I will throw the floor open to questions, and we already have several. The first question is for the entire panel. Does anybody own a business overseas?
No.
No. No. Are any of you thinking about opening a business overseas? I know Kendal mentioned that his firm has several branches overseas, but Ambassador Perry, Ambassador McGann, are you thinking of setting up an office overseas?
Well, what we've been able to do are two things. One, I have associates who are in overseas locations. They're in Sydney. I have one in Auckland, New Zealand. I have also associates spread across the United States in Los Angeles, Dallas, and partner companies that are in places like Pittsburgh, New York City. And as a company, we also, I should also add, we have a consultant in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. And we also have relationships with other groups in Africa, and then Bob can talk a little bit more about that. But it's very important to be able to have global reach in this market. So to the extent that, no, I don't have office space in Los Angeles, but I've got 3 associates in California. I don't have an office yet in Sydney, Australia, but I have 2 associates in Australia. And as I mentioned, I don't have an office in New Zealand, but I have an associate in New Zealand, as well as actually I have one in Papua New Guinea. So we're spread around the world. One of the important things is that you actually don't necessarily always need brick and mortar structure around you, as long as you have a strong framework and building upon the reputations and knowledge and experience of your associates.
I'd like to build on that. I think you know, the network that I was talking about, that I was working to create basically 20 years ago, and that still exists. It's a network that expands to about 30 countries. And what I find that is, when those law firms that have offices overseas, they more or less, they have a, say for instance, they have business in country X, and they have an office in country X. There's a lot of pressure to use those colleagues in that particular office, and they may not be the colleagues that you would prefer to use, or have the skills and the particular skills and expertise that you're looking for. And so what I find is that I have the flexibility to have a broad range of contacts within country X, and can pick and choose which attorneys or which professionals I need and or want for my particular client. So it's that flexibility that I think is important. But again, as you were saying, it all comes down to just your basic network. You know, I think the question back to the questioner is, you know, what are you looking for by opening an office overseas, and can that be accomplished in another manner?
Thank you all so much. We have another very interesting question for the panel. How do you all handle talking with clients about managing risk in Africa? I think this time we'll start with Kendal.
Managing risk, I think for many of the deals that I'm working on, at least by the time it reaches me, it's some degree of due diligence, finding out as much as you can about the people that you're working with, and that can be with local colleagues, networks that you have, finding out about the individuals that you're doing business with, finding out what their background is, and acting accordingly from there, whether or not these are in fact the people that you want to move forward with on the deal, or whether or not there are other people strategically placed in government or in that particular industry that can give you some information with respect to how to manage particular risk. Of course, the whole contract that we're going to eventually be sitting down once we put pen to paper is a whole allocation of risk, indemnification, insurance, you know, currency. I mean, there's a tax liability. There's a whole series of risks that I think lawyers, as sort of a natural consequence of putting together a deal, they're constantly trying to balance the risk. But you know, it's difficult to do that, again, unless you have done your due diligence. You know the other party, you know the industry, you know the country, and what its weaknesses or opportunities are, and go from there.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Perry.
The question again
is, well, how do you talk with your clients about risk when working in Africa? How do you talk to your clients about managing risk?
So I would generally say that compared to the US, the rule of law is not as strong in most African countries as here to protect you against human frailties or actions. So having a local partner who you trust, and that gets back to the whole networking that you've done up to that point in your life. Maybe someone that you have gone to school with, someone you have already worked with, who is from that culture, from that country, and can help walk you through understanding what the risks are and how do you mitigate them. If you don't trust that person, then you're going to fall into a bigger hole than you would ever have considered. If you trust that person, you can find a way around that particular risk. And then you shape a relationship with that person as a partner or a client, that you're working together with a common purpose to meet another goal of other clients who want to enter that market. You always, if you're operating from the US, always have to be concerned about foreign corrupt practices, and don't fall for something that looks to be too good. I have, in one country I've been working with, they wanted to bring in hotels, investors, and there was local capital available, but when the international chain did its due diligence, it wouldn't touch the deal because they had to report back who are your local partners, and they knew it couldn't pass muster. That's the same thing Kendal mentioned about doing your due diligence. You do the same thing here in the US, but the conditions are a little bit different, and you're operating when you're doing it here from a culture that you already understand. And you have to get inside the mindsets of others, the sub-ethnic cultures in other countries that you're going to be working through, and understanding if your particular partner is from one and he or she is opening doors, how that is perceived by others in that country.
I think
Thank
I
you
can.
so much.
I think I can add to that a bit because I want to pick up where Bob mentioned the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Uh, I think to focus on the fact that American companies operate under the rule of law. In Africa, folks operate under rules of the game, so they're incompatible. I don't want to necessarily single Africa out. And I think one way of answering this is putting on my ambassador's hat. And I would point out to every American businessman that came to my office and asked for a briefing about doing business in my countries. I would remind them that I also was under an obligation to notify U.S. authorities if I got wind of any violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and would unhesitatingly turn them over to the FBI if they were caught bribing local officials or participating in other nefarious activities to gain a business advantage. So, if you're dealing with American companies, they're under stricter rules. And sometimes it's extremely difficult to manage a relationship with an American company and an African partner company. And so what we find is that, or at least what I have found, is that it's very difficult to get into certain sectors in Africa's economy, some of which have actually been closed to us. For sometimes, such as agriculture, marketing consumer goods, manufacturing, things of this nature. So the only two openings we've been able to find in dealing with American companies in Africa are those companies that we can assist in either being underwritten by U.S. government agencies such as International Financial Development Corporation, the successor to OPIC, or arrangements linking them to, again, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, which is part of DOD, which underwrites projects that American companies could actually engage in overseas. So in short, the window is very, very narrow that we have to operate in. I wouldn't necessarily say it's difficult or more than challenging that can't be met. But I do think you have to understand that American companies, when you want to represent them, have to work in a different culture. And many American companies are resistant in doing so.
Thank you so much. Now, our next question is also excellent. I just want to take a moment to thank all of our participants. We've had up to 26 participants, and at the moment we have about 19 for the excellence of their questions. The next one is, can U.S. businesses be successful if they impose U.S. standards abroad for diversity, equity, and inclusion? In particular, since abroad we may be talking about ethnic diversity instead of race. And I will start with Ambassador McGann.
Well, it's sort of interesting because if we're talking about doing business overseas, by definition, we are talking about diversity and ethnicity because Americans aren't a minority in that environment. So I don't think we have to worry too much about U.S. domestic regulations concerning diversity and gender as things that could be obstacles to doing business overseas. I think it's more important to understand the educational situation in the country in which you're operating in, understanding why certain groups may have access to higher education than others, and keeping those points in mind as you still realize that you have to engage with a government that often is run based on informal links within civil society. So on the one hand, I think it's clearly important and necessary when we're talking about American employees that diversity, equality, ethnicity, and inclusion are centerfold. I think I began this discussion this evening talking about my hesitancy to enter the Bank of America's management program because I felt at that time I was going to be restricted to an area in which not only I couldn't grow, but I didn't want to grow through. So I think that today, the opportunities for Americans, for minority Americans and women are far greater than they were, particularly if you're going to pursue working for a larger company. And I would like to think that particularly those companies that are interested in contracting with the United States government or working with U.S. agencies that underwrite American investments overseas, that they would be mindful of the importance of diversity.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Perry.
I would say that operating in another country is not just the diversity of the American team that you should be sensitive to, but the diversity of your local partners. Tribal, religious differences, to the degree that you can find people from all of those different communities to be part of your team, it expands the access that you have in their local economy. If you are dealing with solely a Christian company and you are in a country that is half Muslim, then getting over to that other part of the population is going to be more difficult, and vice versa. So in trying to find partners who have access through all elements of the local economy, I think strengthens your opportunities.
Thank you so much. Kendal?
Well, I think for me, the U.S. standard for diversity doesn't actually just limit itself to race. I mean, diversity is, as the other speakers have said, it's just pulling from a variety of different communities and making sure that you have equality in terms of opportunity and inclusiveness as far as bringing people to the table and making sure that you have some matrix that they can feel included and participate as well as everyone else. I think diversity, even in the United States, depends on which community you're in. For instance, there were law firms that were saying, "Oh, look, our Latino population is magnificent." Well, if you're in Vermont, 20% Latino in Vermont is a little different than 20% Latino in Miami. So, I mean, it really depends on the community that you are in and how you're and who you have to draw from, and who, I think, if you're talking about a U.S. standard, who is the, using the South African term, historically disadvantaged? Who are these historically disadvantaged people that need to be at the table, that we can learn from, that we can grow from, and that we can access their community through business and other means?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, we have another question from our participants talking about the post-COVID-19 world. If the post-COVID-19 world attaches less value to and need for brick and mortar assets, Might operating costs be significantly lowered for smaller international businesses? And I'll start with you, Kendal.
Well, I mean, there have been studies that have shown that over the last several months, the consumers have consumers online on Africa in certain countries, Nigeria, Ghana, they've grown like 30%, and that has had a tremendous impact on how people do business and how they get their products to market. There are new platforms that are being made on a daily basis, monthly basis, which people are using online platforms to sell their products, to sell their produce, and it's really changing and really putting into light speed mechanisms and platforms that probably we would have expected to see 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now. And so that is definitely going to have a lower impact on operating expenses. It's going to open the door for others. They may not have had a chance to be viable as a business. It's also going to create some problems for those brick and mortars who are a little slow to turn to the new opportunities and take advantage of what's going on in the marketplace. So I think it's really going to be interesting to see what are the lasting impacts of this new sort of push for online and how it's going to impact businesses large and small.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Perry?
I think in some ways, in the developing world, particularly in Africa, that in the absence of well-established infrastructure, when the cell phone came in, it wasn't just for talking, it was for making payments in a way that we've just started doing here in the last 3 years. They were doing that 10 years ago in Kenya because they didn't have the established banking system. So they went quickest to the new technology, and it was easily used by both the Maasai in rural areas as well as people in Nairobi. It was a new technology that met everyone's needs. I think in terms of e-commerce in West Africa, you buy online, your phone gives direction to the person who's delivering what you bought on a bicycle. So again, people adapting, using the technology to do business in e-commerce, and less of a need and cost for brick and mortars locations. The customer just wants the service. You don't need to have the store around in 10 places in an urban area, as long as you can deliver. And so the cost should be lower. And the trick for the American going in is to find the right partner, help them acquire the added technology they need, and you will prosper.
Thank you so much. Ambassador McGann?
Well, I do think that in a post-COVID world, in certain areas, we can see a lowering of operating costs. But again, the reduction in operating costs still doesn't eliminate some of the other things that make you viable as a firm. It depends on, are you marketing strategic advice? Are you marketing products, right? Or are you marketing capital? Your ability to succeed in any of those three areas is still going to be dependent upon your knowledge and experience, and whether or not you can credibly convince clients that you can perform as promised. So on the one hand, yes, lower operating expenses makes it easier for you to be flexible and actually to bring together a larger group of people to work on the same effort or same endeavor. But at the same time, that doesn't detract from the three things I had mentioned before, that in order, whether or not you're giving strategic advice, selling products, or selling capital, you still need for your own. You still need capital, credibility, and sustainability to make it, regardless of whether or not you're trying to do it virtually or in a brick and mortar location, either here in the United States or overseas.
Thank you so much. Well, we are drawing to the end of our hour. However, I do have one last question that I'd like you all to answer. The vast majority of our participants are all young professionals. And the question is, what do you suggest that young professionals can do to create opportunities for themselves in fields and in firms where there's necessarily not a job being advertised? Ambassador Perry?
I think you need to use your networks in order to get into those places. Also, maybe sometimes volunteering with an NGO, volunteering to be on a board where you get to meet people who have the deep pockets, who share that common goal of doing, helping society, and they see in you energy and light and introduce you to something that you would not have known of otherwise. And then get into an organization, learn from people and the structure of that organization, and then take that to whatever you want to do next.
Thank you. Ambassador McGann.
Well, I'd just like to underscore the importance of taking advantage of networking opportunities and joining organizations like BPIA that can advance your own goals. It is important to also broaden your networking capabilities by joining other organizations. For instance, the United Nations Association, the National Capital Area Chapter is another way of meeting people who are engaged in international affairs, participating in events sponsored by think tanks, paying attention also to the association meetings that are often online and sometimes are free for you to participate in. Use those opportunities to learn how to navigate the private sector, and I think you'll do fine.
Thank you. And Kendal?
Sure, I would absolutely agree with the prior comments, but maybe I can even drill down on some more practical applications about how to go about doing sort of when we say networking or when we say leveraging your network. Here's one thing I did. For instance, I knew it was important in my law firm to get to know everyone that was there. I took the directory and made an excuse to meet every attorney in every office. And I would go and I'd get them to talk about themselves in the sense of saying, hey, do you have any advice? Could you tell me about your career trajectory and any advice for me now? What would you do differently? Get people to talk about themselves, gather that information and use it for the next professional relationship that you look to grow. And I think oftentimes in going through that process, you'll learn things. You'll come in. You'll establish a rapport with some people that could grow to be your mentors, and others you may not. But unless you take that initial step, you're not going to know. And I think the bottom line for me often is, if I had to look back on things, a mentor that you share an affinity with, that you have a rapport with, is worth their weight in gold. And that is even if that mentor is not exactly on the path that you would like to be on. But once you understand and appreciate and take from them everything that you can get, oftentimes I think that you're in a better position to then deviate towards the goal once you have acquired the skills and knowledge that you have from the person who you share that rapport with, who is willing to give of themselves to help you achieve whatever goals you have. It's those relationships at the end of the day that make or break you.
Thank you so much, Kendal. And with that, we have reached the end of our hour. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for making the time to share their history and their insights with all of the participants. And as we ended on the note of networking and making your own opportunities, I invite everybody to join us in the networking space. So with that, I thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.